a company that he's being trained coming out of BC. And there's a lot of irony in this conversation I'm going to have right now, these 3 points I'm going to make. He's connected to somebody in BC to do some work. He started his career there, and I mean started his career in football there when he played for the Canadian Junior Football League in BC. Ended up playing for his hometown team Winnipeg. Then ended up going to BC before that, then going to Winnipeg, and now he's here in Toronto. And it's kind of a weird kind of triangle where, his work life, he was hoping it would be a little better here. The opportunities aren't as flush as he thought when he first decided to stay here. But I think the hanging thing over his decision-making process is I clearly received the message that he is very happy to work with Dinwiddie. What about you?
I think so too. I think he values the fact that Ryan Dinwiddie wants his opinion, asks for his opinion, and he can be used in that way. Sometimes coaches don't like players getting too involved, but Ryan Dinwiddie definitely wants his players' input. We've seen it over the years. Andrew Harris spent a little bit of time on the sidelines with his injury, and he probably spent a good amount of that with the coaching staff and giving them thoughts and ideas. So, Ryan Dinwiddie already knows how Andrew Harris can be in that sort of role. So that does make sense to me. Ryan Dinwiddie is definitely a player's coach in that regard. He values what the players can provide him in terms of information and just their honesty. Really, I think that's the other thing too. Is Ryan Dinwiddie doesn't mind if his players express an opinion as long as it's beneficial to what the team is trying to do.
It's one thing when you're a player to be taught.
Yep.
It's another thing when you're a coach, you need to learn. And in his case, he knows that there's a good learning curve here with the experience that he had last year. And this isn't all subject matter that David and I are making up. This is what the message that he sent us, that he gave us, that he's really happy to be in Toronto from the perspective of being able to learn how to coach. And he's very pleased with, and I assume it doesn't end with Ryan Dinwiddie. I'm sure there's a lot to be learned with the coaching staff that is on Toronto. And needless to say, they won a Grey Cup. So I think they understand how to create a winning atmosphere, a winning team. And he was a big part of the atmosphere about winning. He was a clear, I think he was anyway, because there were times this team, it could have gone off the rails. I've talked about this before. They in Saskatchewan in the East Coast, had a game, and both the teams were in a bad place in and around that time. Soon after, from before to soon after, and both teams' trajectory came from the same position. They were having discipline issues, but for some reason, Toronto's discipline got under control. And I'm sure that has something to do with a learning curve for Harris, watching it firsthand, how to get, that major compassion that these players had. That, all football players, all they want to do is win. We can agree on that, right? It's just a question of what it takes to win, not as an individual, but as a group, and the part that you as an individual need to contribute. And to see that chemistry work is a great opportunity. And I think he feels he's in a situation here where his coaching will really, move quickly. The learning curve will be much steeper and much more beneficial.
Yeah, no, I know for sure. I think I know a lot of people are wondering, what does he have left to prove? Well, first off, it's players know when they're kind of ready near the end. Like Enoch Mwamba was sort of the same thing. I see the two of them as kind of the same thing where they're just building on their legacy now. They want to accomplish something different. They've won. Enoch Mwamba's won. Andrew Harris has won. This is not about really winning per se. This is on building on a legacy and really, in a way, kind of leaving Toronto in a good spot, right? Because They're the ones who are the leaders, so they want to make sure that they're leaving Toronto in a better position than they found it when they first came here.
Argo fans are fortunate in the sense you and I are fortunate in the sense that we have had the opportunity over the last 10 years, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, well, 5 years and 5 years, three Grey Cups, 12, 17, 22. And the one constant I got to say, and I'm going to ask you, and this goes for all the Canadian Football League. The 2012 Toronto Argonauts had a boatload of great coaches on that team.
Yep.
We know in hindsight, looking back at that team, how great the coaching staff was. We also know in 2017, the coaching staff historically were good, especially when you talk about the head coach they had at the time, right? And some of the other coaches they had on the team. And I'm predicting, and I don't think it'll be a surprise if on the coaching staff for the Toronto Argonauts that won the 22 Grey Cup, I don't think it'll be a surprise that there's a few coaches on there who are assistant coaches who will, like the 2012 team, end up being head coaches. And Harris wants to be in that group. And he said today, I'm looking forward to coming back in about 4 years. Remember, he said 3 or 4 years, I think is what he said, right? And I'm looking forward to coming back. He's going to go and help in the league that brought him to football in the Canadian Football League. He's going to be with them for a little while, and he's thinking 3 or 4 years. He's looking forward to coming back to the Canadian Football League, wherever that is.
Yeah, I mean, for the players, there's an itch to remain in the game some way, somehow. And, for a lot of players, that's coaching, right? Management coaching. You don't really see too many players graduate to the management step, like unless you're a coach slash manager, like Orlando Steinauer is now. So they got to they need to find ways. And, the CFLPA has done a pretty decent job of the last few years of educating players on that. Um, and you're seeing it now. There's a certain characteristic you need to be a coach in the CFL. Some say, oh, he's a good player, he'll make a good coach. It's not just being a good player, it's being a good communicator, being a good teacher, being able to get the most out of your players. That's what makes a good coach, right? It's funny because one coach that doesn't get a lot of, you talk about the 2012 team, the last few years, one coach that doesn't get a lot of talk about it in Toronto is Kevin Ivan.
Right.
All these head coaches have come and gone. Kevin Ivan has kind of been the constant,
Constant. Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
He's the one I think that's helped a lot of the coaches that have come in to kind of give them the lowdown on the team, because he can bring the player perspective and the coach perspective. I think that's such a valuable tool. And Corey Mace is another one. Somebody who some were wondering, could he be a defensive coordinator in his first year? Could he lead a defense in his first year to a Grey Cup? And he did exactly that. So there is value to being, for being a player to get into coaching, but there's a lot that goes into it to actually take that next step in your career.
An irony of ironies, we're talking about a good segue when you talk about him. You talk about the assistant general manager who should be a full-fledged general manager that within this organization, as sometimes does happen, but many times you get people that are involved in an organization to get a higher position or to improve their lot in football, they need to go from one franchise to another. But we have a general manager here who's who started. I mean, I don't even know how I would define how he was just an assistant. Geez, I don't want to sound like I'm demeaning the general manager, the assistant general manager, but he's literally learned being a general manager in the Toronto Argonaut organization.
Yeah, Vince Magri has again another constant within the organization, right? He is the one that's sort of stuck around and helped keep this team in the position that they're in. A lot of GMs, when they come in, want to bring their own guys, they want to bring in their own people. Pinball came in here, they looked at the management team that was there, and they identified people that he always said, I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. So he identified people who are smarter than him. Vince Magri is one of them. He is what he has done in terms of finding talent in the draft, finding he has in a lot of ways. I say Vince Magri is the GM of the Argos. I know
Absolutely.
he doesn't have it. He doesn't have that title. I always think of Pinball as more of a president, and he's the general manager. Oh, Bill Manning may not want to hear me say that, but it's kind of true in a way because Vince Magri is handling more of those player personnel. He's handling more of the player transactions. Pinball is certainly doing a lot of work in
And
terms
he
of
started with the Canadian players. And he
yes.
started with the Canadian players, right? Because that's where he comes from, drafting Canadian players.
I remember one of the first one-on-one conversations I had with Vince Magri was just before the CFL draft, just to get his thought process on the amount of work it takes to do the draft. And he puts in serious work. It's very tough. And now with the coaches cap, which I mean, it just continues to be the most what's the word I'm looking for?
Problematic,
Problematic.
challenging.
I would say challenging situation the CFL has to deal with because you know what? Vince Magri probably has deserved a raise over and over and over again and probably hasn't gotten what he should get because you pay Vince Magri more, you don't get his supporting staff around him to get what he wants. So, like, this is where I
I
hate
think what you're asking is a question, though. We really don't know. At least I don't know,
them.
unless you do.
It's
We don't really know how much he gets paid,
no,
how it reflects his contribution to the team. Well, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but they also brought in Jim Barker, who has a little bit of experience in football. So I think he was a contributor, and I think he had something to do with helping when that team could have gone off the rails. I believe his experience, the odd word here or there in leadership, he's like to me, he's like a godmother on this team because he can actually help every department.
he can. And what I was going to get at with the coaches cap here is, well, I still think it's the most ludicrous thing because you're basically putting a cap on what people should be making, and it was brought up in one of I can't remember the station out in Saskatchewan, but basically saying, you might eventually start losing coaches and management.
CJME.
Yep, you're gonna lose some of those if the XFL or the USFL or whatever league down in the states can offer these management managers just even more money, but not even like the role, but just more money. Some of them might consider taking because they know in the CFL they're capped out. You brought up Jim Barker. I don't think Jim Barker is making a whole heck of a lot because he was a consultant. He's not, consultants usually aren't making what actual day-to-day staff are making. Although Jim Barker was there for, I mean, there wasn't a day I didn't see Jim Barker, so it's not like he was here and there. But that's how that you starting to see more of that. You're starting to see that, you know, that consultant role. They did it with Kahari Jones when he went to Hamilton. Like that's kind of a way to not pay the person a lot just because you can't afford to give a blank check to these guys.
There's a gray area when it comes to paying consultants. A
There is.
very, very, very. Did I mention very gray area?
Did you say very gray? Okay.
Very gray area when it comes to how much you pay a consultant, because there's a definition of what is part of the football management team, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if there's any connection to being a part of running the team, then you will go under the management cap. The ticket sellers aren't under the management cap. I'll just try to simplify this as best I can. So somewhere between ticket seller and coach that's where the line is in there somewhere, and Jim Barker's in between those two at some place. And depending on whether he falls on the side of a management of the team management, or the ticket seller, that dictates where his salary goes or comes from.
Right. Exactly. So I still think if there's one thing I want the CFL to eradicate over the next few years, it is the management cap. It is this coaching cap. I understand it was trying to even out the playing field of spending, but I
I
think
don't know, David. I don't think they'll ever get rid of it because this was something that was a rock that started rolling down the hill, or a snowball that started rolling down the hill, and it's giant now, and it's a bone of contention of the players that they don't get guaranteed contracts. Why should coaches? And the salary cap and or the salary that is paid within the organization, there seemed to be an imbalance by virtue of the players considering the situation, knowing what everybody's getting paid. So I think it's going to be kind of difficult to do that. But I do understand and agree with you that you got to have good coaches, and I'll add to that good quarterbacks too. And I think that's where um, one of the problems with the Canadian Football League emanate from those two issues: coaches and quarterbacks.
exactly. Yeah, that's what keeps interest in leagues when you have continuity with teams, continuity in any case, having a good quarterback, having a good coaching staff. When you're all using the same pool of players, all can kind of pay roughly the same amount for players. It's really those differences of the coaches and the very skilled positions. That's what sets a lot of teams apart. That's what can set a team apart.
The unfortunate truth, and I'll say it out loud, and I know a lot of people won't agree out loud, but I know if you think about it, here's my definition of the finances of the Canadian Football League. Nobody, nobody in the Canadian Football League gets paid as much as they deserve. None of the players, none of the coaches, none of the
Staff
GMs,
members.
none of the staff of any kind. And you know what, it's because it is what it is. It is a league that needs to turn turnstiles, needs to determine how much they can afford to charge fans and make sure that they show up. So football, and this is the truth, on the whole in Canada as a country, especially in the big cities, football is not as popular a sport as it is to you and me. Unfortunately, under those circumstances, a lot of people aren't going to earn what you and I think they deserve. Do I begrudge Bo Levi Mitchell making almost $1 million, or more than a million? What, 1.2 in a 2-year contract? Do I begrudge him that? No, go for it, brother. Get as much money as you can. But on the same token, and the same's true now in Saskatchewan with Trevor Harris,
Mhm.
the more money a quarterback makes, because of the limited funds to create a roster, and 5 million bucks and change is a limited amount of money to put together a team when you're paying a quarterback a million or a half a million or whatever.
It's always
That's the challenge.
it is always a challenge, right? And because CFL teams have realized the formula. There's a formula here that they all kind of have to follow because I'm trying to think who was the first to really up the salary. I guess it would have been Bo Levi Mitchell and Michael Riley when they were getting well over, let's say, 700,000. I like they were the ones that kind of started this idea, like to think a quarterback getting over $1 million. You don't really think that that's a possibility in a way because we always hear that the CFL players don't really get paid. Quarterbacks do quite well for themselves, especially those who have stuck around for as long as they have and have been able to be a starter for as long as they have. Like Bo Levi Mitchell has probably made some decent money as a CFL quarterback because how long was he not a starter in this league, not making starter
Yeah.
money, right? Michael Riley was the same thing, you know, but McLeod Bethel Thompson, he might be making roughly the same or maybe a little less than
Or
USFL, but
was. Yeah.
he's, I mean, first off, he's being paid in US, so that's a bonus for him. But he's also doesn't really, the money wasn't the motivating factor for him. Family was. But for a lot of these players, family comes first because they're thinking of I'm going to have to make X amount of money to make sure that my family's future is secured, because quarterbacks don't have the longest shelf life, right? Running backs don't, like, somebody said, "Oh, why are you paying so much for a running back?" If you got a good running back in the CFL, if you have an Andrew Harris, it helps your offense big time. But a lot of these running backs also realize I got to maximize as early as I can in my contract, because as I get older, the money's just not going to be there. That's just the economics of what teams can pay, and just the role that these running backs and how the toll it takes on them. Eventually, you start to see that they get less and less, or they don't get a job at all, and then they're probably thinking, if I had only made more earlier in my career to help myself, as I make this transition.
Absolutely. You know, the great thing is that there is a giant pool of talent, for the Canadian Football League to draw from. We have players, and on one hand, on the other hand, we're very fortunate to have young men, older men. By older, I'm talking 30s, 30 plus. In the with Harris 36. Um, we have players who love to play the game.
Mm.
I want to make sure that I get to say that too. They don't get paid enough, in my mind, for what they do, but they get paid the amount they can be paid. But a lot of why they do what they do is not so much about money. They love the game too, because I sincerely say it, not in an insult to the Canadian Football League and the Canadian Football League teams, but what I am saying is that for those of us that love the game of football, and we love the idea of going to a local Toronto town city to watch a football game, they do a pretty good job of entertaining us. We can whine about all the stuff where, well, Toronto doesn't get enough people. BC needs to work things out. Montreal needs ownership. All these horrible stories that are part of the Canadian Football League. In spite of all that, what you and I can agree on, and I think anybody who's being honest and reflective with honesty, we're very lucky to be able to go to a game, a live sporting event, football being the game, for the amount of money that fans pay to go see this event. And it is an event because it starts early in the afternoon, sometimes in the morning, depending on game time. This is what people love about football. It's an event. It starts at the tailgate, it ends up during the game, and then post game as well, depending on how late the game finishes. For the price that that fans pay to go to BMO Field to watch a championship football team, where you get to see professionals who are playing better than they're being paid,
Mhm.
be grateful, be thankful, realize how lucky we are. And this is why I'll be honest. It's that statement that always rings in my head. Why I get irritated with people outside of Toronto who criticize Toronto and talk about how terrible a place it is. We should move the franchise to Kitchener.
I'll even say it's even more. I'll add that it's more insulting when I hear people within Toronto talk about the CFL. Oh, it's cookie
Yeah, you
cutter.
can include them in that thing too.
It's cookie cutter compared to the NFL. I'm like, well, no kidding. These guys get paid a fraction of what NFL players get paid. They have they don't have anywhere close to the to what NFL players get in terms of resources. Of course, the product is going to be different, but for the fact that these guys are putting their bodies on the line
And
every
they
time
do.
they take the field for a paycheck that is a fraction of what NFL players make. This is why CFL players get the most respect out of me, out of all the professional sports that I have covered, that I have talked to athletes. Not only do they appreciate us more as media because they understand what our role is in trying to help them, right, with exposure, but I have respect in knowing that they don't take for granted the situation that they're in. They never
And
do.
you get the odd one.
Right.
You get a Wilder that complains about, and I don't blame him for that. I want to make this clear too. He's only saying what a lot of players are thinking. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, in spite of those feelings, when they go on the field, the vast majority of them, 99.9% that go on that field, they give everything they've got and they're not thinking about whining. They do their job, they do it to the best of their ability. At least from my perspective, from what I've seen and talking to them, this is an opportunity for them. Many of them, look, many of them come to the Canadian Football League surprised that there's even a league at this level, because other than this, they don't know about the Canadian Football League. They're thinking about the USFL. They're thinking about the XFL. And all they know is, if they understand football and they've followed football to any degree, they know that all those leagues have a shelf life that lasts about that long. So, the Canadian Football League, when players come here, and we've seen them, and you heard McLeod Bethel Thompson talk about how much pride he is and how proud he is of the Canadian Football League. Remember, his complaints aren't just complaints. What he says is what he believes will make the league better. So it's not like he can snap your fingers and do everything that McLeod Bethel Thompson says or feels the league should do that he did during the Grey Cup. It's not that the league won't do that stuff. It's not the fact that the league doesn't know what McLeod Bethel Thompson has as far as what he's saying to be real. It's about what can the Canadian Football League team or organization or league can do. And this is another one of those things that's like a nagging bite on my neck when people talk about the Canadian Football League, like, oh well, all the negative stuff. I hate all the negative stuff. So I promised myself this year that I'd be more positive towards the end of the year. And that's what I mean. The stuff that McLeod Bethel Thompson is saying is true, needs to be considered. It's just like thinking about changing the rules to make the game better. The only way it's going to change and the only way it's going to get better is if you think about what it'll take to do those things. We spend so much time criticizing, but we spend very little time as human beings coming up with a solution. It's very easy to criticize. So, and I'm here in the business of, I hope I'm in the business of constructive criticism, but it is criticism that I offer, and it's just part of what we do.
It is. Well, it is. I mean, I don't take anything I think about when it comes to the CFL has never really been from a fan perspective. Just because there's enough fans that can give their opinions. I try to take a more, you know, even keel, non-bias, right? Fans get hard on the CFL for things that I think that I can see it from a different lens. Let's just say. So, when I defend the CFL, I don't do it as a fan. I do it based on what I've seen, what I have witnessed, and what I can offer from a different perspective. Because I do see fans, the way they react to certain criticism that the CFL gets, and it's the wrong way, in my opinion. Because a lot of people like to get people riled up, and it's very easy to get CFL fans riled up. You've seen it, Frank, over the years.
Oh, I riled up the GM of the Saskatchewan Roughriders because I said, I forget how it happened because I don't know the context, but I'm not worried about the context. It really doesn't matter because I think people can put the two and two together. I said to him, well, in a group of people with him in it, I said, Saskatchewan fans will be really happy. They were talking about what it'll take to keep the Saskatchewan fans happy. I said, yeah, if you win every game. And somehow the look on his face was, how the heck can you expect me to run a team and win every game? He totally misunderstood what I was trying to say. And what I'm trying to say, and what I'll continue to say, is fans don't like losing. And the more that you lose, the more upset that the fans will get. In Calgary last night, a CFL town, but right now they're not playing football there, they're playing hockey. The Calgary Flames were booed in that game. They lost 3-0, and while they were playing, they were getting booed. All right. Now, that seems kind of, I don't know, you can take from it what you will, but I will take this that fans don't like losing. They want to win. And what makes, I come from the fan world, unlike you. What makes a team play well is they want to play well. As a fan, we expect them to win all the time. But as a person who covers them from your perspective, because I'm a two-headed monster. When I hear stories like that, I understand why the fans are upset, but I also understand that the fans sometimes can tend to be unrealistic and let's say mischaracterize the situation. In Saskatchewan, to get back to the point, Saskatchewan had a bad year last year. Why'd they have a bad year, David?
Well,
They
fans
didn't make the playoffs.
they make the playoffs. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what the fans want, right? That's the ultimate failure. You don't make the playoffs.
Mhm.
And so, the GM of Saskatchewan has a tiger by the tail. He benefits from the excitement that the Ryder Green generates, but along with that excitement come expectations. And the fans know the contribution they make to the team. Trust me. And therefore, they have higher expectations, and they don't expect just to go and see a game. They expect to see a team win and win the Grey Cup. And because they're the biggest supported team, one of the biggest supported teams, they justifiably in their minds say, well, we should be the ones winning the Grey Cup. Why aren't we winning the Grey Cup?
Well, exactly. Yeah, I have seen it where, and it's funny because in the CFL, fans get more access to players and to coaches and things like that than a lot of other professional sports. And I
They have
think
a bond. They build a bond.
there's a bond,
Inadvertently, they're building a bond.
and you see how it can be a good and bad thing. It's
Yes.
good because fans can see how the coaches and management kind of respect them. There
and
seems
and a very extreme and dangerous symbiosis taking place. The interaction can be very electric, and a lot of sparks can fly.
no, definitely right. And so I'll give the CFL that they understand the importance of community. And in a way, there's a lot of other professional leagues that do it. It's just the CFL isn't in a position where they can totally ignore the fans either. I always say, like, they have to make sure that the fans remain happy as much as possible.
Well, I think also it would, even a lug nut would know that better be better. You better be good to your fans, because if if the way that your league makes money is turning turnstiles, then you better make sure that the fans are invested, in your team, in your players, in the league. And that investment you've pointed out repeatedly, and I agree with you 100%, the continuity in a franchise by virtue of their players, it's imperative that they try to achieve that to the best that they can, as difficult a challenge as it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's always that challenge. There'll always be that challenge, and in certain markets, that challenge is more apparent than others. That in Saskatchewan,
And the advantages too, David. The other side of that equation, the advantages are there too. I talked about Saskatchewan, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa. I think they're coming back. Montreal, the fans there. Toronto. If the end of last year was any indication, David, as far as I'm concerned, I think they'll have a good improvement in attendance this year. I believe they will.
you just have to hope that there hasn't been any drop off in momentum from last year. That
Well, I like what they've done with the cup. We talked about this. There, 100 different places it's been, and they're thinking about 150 before you know it, and maybe a little more than that by the end of the offseason.
no,
So why stop then?
it's definitely a good thing that they have done to ensure that the interest has stayed around. It's not really the fans that they have to make sure that the fans who are season ticket holders get the respect that they deserve. but it's those who came to games that weren't season ticket holders, came to games that weren't there during the year. Did they do enough to reel those people in? I usually don't do it now because you either have to ask at the end of the season or kind of closer to, because people aren't ready to make commitments on season tickets yet. I know. I mean, you know that, Frank, for a fact.
Yeah, it's about, but they have to make them available for the dedicated season ticket holders so that they can schedule their summer accordingly.
Yep.
And it's very important that I like what, as much as the Canadian Football League gets criticized, this is one of the things they've done right. They've reacted to what a lot of fans appreciate, and that is the way they decided under Ambrosi. One of the things that he's done that's been very positive in my mind, and I credit him for it because he was the commissioner when it happened. He decided to make sure that they put the schedule out a lot earlier than the end of February.
Yeah. That was important. I know the Argos fans get upset about the
Oh, they
Halifax.
get upset about how the schedule looks, of course. But
Uh,
what fan base doesn't? Are you going to tell me that any schedules, is there a schedule that all the fans will like?
I never really took into account the reason why the league felt they had to get the schedule out at a certain time, and until I started talking with people who were upset at, like, we like to try to plan our vacations, we like to try to plan certain things for the summertime, kids going to
Cottages,
all those things.
trailers,
But
trips. Summer's a days you get on the road, right?
one thing that we can talk about on the next show, maybe, because I don't know if we have enough time today, but the idea of when games are played, the
Uh,
time of
the
day.
time or the day or both?
I think, well, day is important. The day of the week is important, especially the summertime. You want to make sure that you're capitalizing on certain days, but the time. I was somebody who told me they were disappointed in the number of day games the Argos had this year. Part of it was due to the, I think, television audience and playing a bit to the television audience of having the game at a certain time. But then you're also limiting how many families can go, because families, when it comes to summertime or when it comes to certain times in the year, they don't want to be taking their kids out that late because it's a pain to have to bring them all the way home. It's a late night. It's a little bit of a ways to get home for some of them, and they said that was a bit of a problem with especially with this year's
Yeah,
schedule.
there's lots of schools of thought, and on the opposite of that, David, there's a lot of people who'd rather have the night game on Sunday because they can go to the cottage or the trailer and come back for the game. So if I can be the devil's advocate on that one,
Hmm.
yeah, but we can talk about that next week. On what we've got a minute left, so we're almost done. We can talk about that next week. I'll give you the last 30 seconds to tie up this show today.
Yeah, it's because right now it's combine season, so we're starting to see some of the testing coming out. I'm sort of like slowly getting my draft prep going. I haven't fully looked into it, but sooner or later, I mean, we just went through free agency. The draft is going to be coming up in the rear view very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that you can expect to be very interesting. We can start talking about the draft and some of the players that will be made available. It'll be a fun draft. There have been some interesting trades made every year. One of the biggest challenges we talk about, of course, is what players are getting drafted lower because they'll probably go to the NFL. I'm dying to see what that list looks like too.
Yeah.
David, thanks for doing this. Final word to you.
Uh no, thanks. Thanks as always. It's I know during these times it's hard to find things to talk about. It's not yet. It's not until after the draft things get a little complicated.
Well, maybe we'll bring some people in that'll help fill the time. People like, maybe we'll see if the Argos can provide us some management folks so that we can talk to them about the Canadian Football League and, of course, the Toronto Argonauts.
Would be nice.
All right, he's David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. You've been watching the Spanglish World Network. And of course, this show is a CFL talk or a football talk, whatever your choice is. And I'd like to invite you to watch all the shows that we create, at least under the Candid Frank Live umbrella at Candid Frank YouTube channel. and Stanisci, sorry, and hope you watch that. And so please, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.